a Beverly Hills cop pulled over a black woman for driving suspiciously. Minutes later, she was shot dead. But here's the twist: she wasn't just any woman. She was an FBI agent on a top secret mission. What happened next would expose a deep rot inside the system and deliver the harshest justice ever seen in court. This is the moment one officer's prejudice met its reckoning. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. Under the golden California sun, Beverly Hills shimmered like a mirage of luxury and serenity. The palm-lined boulevards were quiet, save for the soft hum of traffic and the distant chatter of tourists taking selfies outside high-end boutiques. Everything looked as it always did, glamorous, safe, untouchable. But that illusion shattered in an instant. It started with the sudden wail of a police siren piercing the calm. A sleek black Tesla Model S signaled and pulled to the curb along Rodeo Drive, its tinted windows reflecting the world it now stood apart from. Behind the wheel sat Camille Monroe, a poised black woman in her early 30s. She wore a fitted navy pantsuit, her natural curls pinned neatly into a bun. Her expression was unreadable, focused, calm, unbothered, until she saw the man approaching in her rearview mirror. Officer Daniel Huxley, a veteran of the Beverly Hills Police Department, approached the Tesla like he was stalking prey. His gait was heavy, his boots thudding against the pavement with the swagger of someone who'd never been told no. His uniform was crisp, his jaw clenched. His eyes scanned the car, then narrowed on the woman behind the wheel. Camille rolled down the window slowly. The cool air hit her skin, but her voice was warm and polite. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a reason I was stopped?" There was no immediate answer. Instead, Huxley eyed her sharply, then asked for license and registration. His tone was flat, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. "You don't belong here." Camille complied without hesitation, her hands moving deliberately, visibly. She handed over her credentials, then repeated her question. "May I ask what this is about?" Huxley glanced at the documents, then back at her. He smirked. "You were driving a little suspiciously," he said. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle so we can take a look around?" Camille blinked, her breath tightening slightly. "Officer, I'm not sure what you mean by suspiciously. And I don't consent to a search of my vehicle unless there's probable cause or a warrant." That was when the shift happened. Something hardened in Huxley's eyes, something old and ugly. His lip curled as if the very presence of a calm, articulate black woman in a luxury vehicle challenged every belief he clung to. "You got something to hide?" he asked, stepping closer. His hand moved casually to the holster at his hip. "You know, folks like you driving around here usually means trouble. Maybe we should take this seriously." "Folks like me," Camille said softly. "You know what I mean," he snapped. "Out of the car. Now." Camille didn't move. Her posture was still, her eyes locked with his. "Officer," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "This is a routine stop. You have my license, my registration. I haven't broken any law. I know my rights." A tense silence followed. Then the unmistakable sound of a hand resting on a firearm. Huxley's voice dropped to a threat. I said get out of the damn car. Camille let out a long, slow breath. She wasn't afraid, not in the way Huxley hoped. She'd been trained for far worse, but she knew what this moment had become. She reached inside her coat, slowly, carefully. I'm going to call my supervisor. She said her words clear. Just stay calm. I'm not resisting. Huxley didn't hear her. Or maybe he didn't care. In his mind, her slow movement meant danger. It meant disrespect. It meant she didn't fear him, and that terrified him more than anything. His voice erupted. Freeze. In one irrational instant, every ounce of protocol professionalism and humanity collapsed. There was no warning, no hesitation, only a sudden deafening bang. The gunshot echoed down the street like a clap of thunder. Tourists screamed and ducked. A nearby barista dropped his drink. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound that preceded it. Inside the Tesla, Camille slumped forward, her body limp, her hands still inside her jacket pocket. Blood bloomed across her shirt like a cruel blossom. Officer Huxley stood frozen, his gun still raised, his mouth slightly open, his heart thudding in his chest. He had expected her to yell, to fight back, to run. Instead, she had reached for something, and now she wasn't moving. He staggered backward, muttering under his breath, trying to convince himself she'd been a threat, that he had no choice, that it was just a misunderstanding. Then he saw what had fallen to the floor beneath the driver's seat. A phone, a badge, and a hard silver ID card embossed with 3 letters that turned his blood cold: FBI. Camille Monroe was no ordinary woman. She wasn't some naive driver out of place in the wrong part of town. She was Special Agent Camille Monroe, an elite federal investigator. And Officer Daniel Huxley had just shot a high-ranking FBI agent during an illegal stop, on camera, in broad daylight, for no reason he could justify. The chaos began instantly. Bystanders with phones, screaming voices, the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder. A woman raced from a nearby boutique, pointing and shouting, "She didn't do anything. I saw it all." Huxley backed away from the car, his eyes wide. His grip tightened around the gun as his knees buckled. The badge gleamed from the floor of the Tesla, illuminated by the sun-cold official and utterly damning. And so began the firestorm. The headlines would come within the hour. The outrage, the investigations, the marches. But in this moment, this one horrible, irreversible moment, one man's prejudice had collided with one woman's quiet strength. And the truth was about to explode far beyond the sidewalks of Beverly Hills. Before the world knew her name, before she became the face of a national reckoning, Camille Monroe lived a life shaped by quiet resilience, relentless discipline, and an unwavering sense of purpose. To the strangers on Rodeo Drive, she had been just a well-dressed woman in an expensive car. But behind the tailored suit and composed demeanor was a woman whose journey defied every stereotype Officer Huxley had projected onto her. Born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, Camille had grown up on the east side of the city, in a neighborhood that carried the scars of systemic neglect. Her mother, Regina Monroe, worked double shifts as a nurse at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Her father, a Vietnam veteran turned city bus driver, taught Camille the value of service and standing tall, even when the world tried to make you feel small. Their modest home was filled with books, music, and conversations about justice as a right, not a privilege. From a young age, Camille showed signs of extraordinary intelligence. Her teachers noticed. So did her community. While other kids struggled to see beyond the block, Camille was already talking about constitutional law and the Supreme Court by the age of 12. Her high school years were a blur of academic achievements, debate championships, and quiet acts of leadership that earned her the nickname the Anchor among her peers. Even then, she carried herself like someone who knew her value. Camille graduated top of her class and earned a full scholarship to Howard University, where she majored in political science and minored in criminal justice. There, in the vibrant heart of Black intellectual tradition, she found her calling. She didn't just want to study the system, she wanted to change it. After earning her degree with honors, she was accepted into Georgetown Law. But instead of pursuing a lucrative career at a top law firm, she joined the FBI. It wasn't an easy road. At Quantico, she was one of only 2 Black women in her training class. The microaggressions were frequent, the assumptions even more so. But Camille had grown used to walking into rooms where no one expected her to be. She didn't ask for permission. She just earned her place and then made it undeniable. She specialized in organized crime and human trafficking, quickly rising through the ranks thanks to her meticulous casework and sharp instincts. Colleagues described her as brilliant but grounded, someone who spoke only when she had something meaningful to say, and when she did, people listened. She had an ability to connect dots that others missed. She saw patterns buried in chaos, victims overlooked by systems, and cracks in the legal framework that could be fortified with the right kind of pressure. When she was tapped to lead the FBI's West Coast Human Exploitation Task Force, a project targeting high-level trafficking networks operating under the cover of luxury real estate and political influence, it wasn't a promotion. It was a test. Camille knew the risks. She'd be living in LA, navigating powerful enemies, and taking on a web of corruption that stretched from Hollywood elites to offshore criminal syndicates. But she accepted without hesitation. This was the work she believed in. This was where she was needed. She had spent the last 8 months under deep cover cultivating informants, building evidence, and pulling together threads of a sprawling case dubbed Operation Edenfall. The day she was shot, she had just come from a secure briefing with a high-level source. The information she received could have unlocked a dozen indictments. But instead of returning to the field office, she made a detour, one last visit to a trusted contact on the west side of town. It was during that short drive back through Beverly Hills that her life intersected with Officer Huxley's bitterness and bias. A moment of brutal irony, considering she had once taught a lecture at the FBI Academy titled Perception versus Threat De-escalation in Cross-Cultural Encounters. Camille had trained agents on the legal nuances of traffic stops, the psychology of implicit bias, and the responsibility that comes with power. She knew exactly what Huxley was doing from the moment he approached the car. The way he sized her up, the tone he used, the sudden escalation when she didn't play along. She had seen this pattern before, read it in reports, and heard it from victims too afraid to speak publicly. Only this time she wasn't behind a desk reading the file. She was living it. What made Camille different, what Officer Huxley couldn't have known, was that she wasn't afraid of him, not because she was arrogant, but because she had already stared down more dangerous men, arms traffickers in Serbia, cartel liaisons in Miami, corrupt city officials who thought their titles gave them immunity. Compared to that, Huxley was a small man with a loud gun and a wounded ego. But Camille also knew that survival wasn't just about courage. It was about timing. It was about strategy. That's why, in her final moments of clarity, she reached for her phone not to record a viral video, but to alert her team to activate a protocol to do what she had trained others to do. It was second nature, an act of professionalism, even in the face of escalating danger. Her badge was with her, not hidden, not tucked away, but clipped to the inside of her jacket standard protocol when meeting with confidential sources. If she had lived long enough to open it, the truth would have been immediate. But she never got the chance. Her credentials, her service, her status, none of it could shield her from the perception Officer Huxley chose to believe. Camille Monroe was not a symbol. She was a daughter, a leader, and a protector. She had spent her entire life working to build bridges between communities and law enforcement to reform a system from within to make it better for the next woman who looked like her. In the cruelest twist of fate, the system she served failed her in the most violent public way. But that failure would not be the end of her story. It would become the beginning of a reckoning, one that would reach the highest corridors of power, inspire millions, and etch her name into the conscience of a country long overdue for accountability. The hours following the shooting of Camille Monroe felt like a bad dream for some and a waking nightmare for others. At first, the official report, submitted by Officer Bradley Huxley, followed a script too familiar: a non-compliant suspect, a threatening gesture, a reasonable use of force. Within an hour, the Beverly Hills Police Department issued a brief press statement citing an ongoing investigation, requesting patience from the public. No names were released. No acknowledgement was made that Camille had died at the scene. No one mentioned she was an FBI agent. But the lie began to fray almost immediately. At the FBI's Los Angeles field office in Wilshire, panic was already beginning to bloom. When Camille failed to check in after her covert meeting, her colleagues, especially Assistant Special Agent in Charge Isaiah Langford, felt something was wrong. Camille never missed a debrief. Never. She was disciplined to a fault. When her tracking device remained stationary for over an hour, parked near a Beverly Hills intersection, Langford dispatched a field team. They arrived to a crime scene already cordoned off the air, heavy with the smell of gunpowder and the faint trace of blood. Langford's badge got him past the tape, but not past the chill that settled in his chest when he saw the silver BMW with its door ajar and a bloodied white blouse crumpled across the driver's seat. He didn't need confirmation. He had known Camille long enough to recognize her style, her grace, and now her absence. One of his agents found her FBI badge on the floor of the car, partially obscured by the shattered glass. Another found her phone screen cracked, still recording audio. By the time the coroner's van pulled away with Camille's body, a wave of rage, sorrow, and urgency had surged through Langford. She had been one of their best. Now she was gone, and the question hung in the air, sharper than the sirens still echoing down Wilshire Boulevard. How had this happened? The next 48 hours became a flurry of calls, commands, and quiet fury. Langford met with FBI Director Sarah Whitmore via secure video call just after midnight. The director's expression was steel. Find out everything she said, her voice clipped with grief. And don't stop until you expose every inch of this. Langford assembled a joint federal task force that same night. Data analysts, civil rights attorneys, forensic specialists, and internal affairs investigators. They weren't just going to review Officer Huxley's actions. They were going to shine a spotlight into the shadowed corners of the Beverly Hills Police Department, an institution long praised for its discretion, efficiency, and its whispered reputation for protecting the powerful and profiling the vulnerable. Camille's shooting wasn't just an isolated act of brutality, it was a symptom, and Langford was determined to uncover the disease. The team began with the body cam. What they found shocked even the most seasoned agents. Huxley's footage showed a calm Camille Monroe asking for clarification, offering identification, and respectfully asserting her rights. At no point did she raise her voice. She didn't reach aggressively. Her only threat was the act of trying to retrieve her phone slowly from the inside of her jacket. The footage cut out seconds after Huxley fired, conveniently. But Camille's own phone hadn't stopped recording. When Langford's team enhanced and synchronized both audio tracks, the disparity became undeniable. Camille had warned that she was reaching for her phone. She had clearly stated she did not consent to a search. She had not resisted. There was no sudden movement, no aggression. Huxley's voice, in contrast, grew increasingly erratic, his words escalating from assertion to outright rage. And then came the gunshot. Langford ordered a full subpoena of Officer Huxley's personnel file. What emerged was a long list of warning signs. 15 civilian complaints over a 10-year period. Excessive force allegations that had been investigated internally and dismissed. Body cam malfunctions in at least 4 separate incidents. An internal affairs memo from 3 years prior that recommended mandatory bias training, which Huxley had refused without consequence. Even more damning, Langford's team discovered encrypted text messages between Huxley and another officer sent just weeks before the shooting. They think they own the place, now one message read, "All this DEI stuff is a joke. Wait till one of them mouths off to me. I'll show 'em what real authority looks like." The rot was not subtle. It had just been protected. Langford took his findings directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Camille's status as a federal agent elevated the stakes, but it was the evidence, the footage, the forensics, the pattern of abuse that made the case undeniable. Federal civil rights charges were drafted. A grand jury was convened. And for the first time in decades, the thin blue line in Beverly Hills began to crack. Meanwhile, the Beverly Hills PD scrambled. Their initial PR statements suddenly rang hollow against the mounting wave of public scrutiny. Activists began gathering outside their headquarters. Celebrities joined in. A mural of Camille's face, soft, strong, eternal, was painted on a downtown wall by a local artist under the words, "She protected us." Who protected her? But Langford didn't stop with Huxley. He dug deeper into department policies, complaint logs, hiring practices. What he found was a pattern of willful blindness, a culture that dismissed civilian concerns, shielded repeat offenders, and rewarded silence. Promotions were handed out not for ethical conduct, but for loyalty. Officers with high arrest numbers, especially in minority neighborhoods, were celebrated while those who advocated for reform were sidelined or pushed out entirely. One brave sergeant, Elisa Grant, came forward with her story. She had filed a report 2 years earlier about Huxley's treatment of a black teenager during a traffic stop. The department buried it. Grant had been reassigned to desk duty and quietly warned to watch her tone. When she saw Camille's face on the news, she broke her silence. Her testimony, combined with others, painted a picture not of a few bad apples, but of an orchard left untended for too long. The media coverage became relentless. National outlets ran exposés, Civil rights attorneys filed class action suits. Retired officers penned op-eds confessing their complicity, and Camille's name became a rallying cry not just for justice, but for truth. She had spent her life digging into hidden systems of abuse. Now, in her absence, she was still doing it. Isaiah Langford stood outside the Beverly Hills precinct one quiet morning, staring up at the cold gray facade. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt sorrow, but also something else resolve. The rot had been exposed, and now it would be burned out, whatever it took. The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles stood like a monolith of promises, some broken, some barely kept. On the first day of the trial, a crowd had already begun to gather outside by dawn. News vans lined the street. Protesters and supporters stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs that carried Camille Monroe's face and words like "Justice for Camille," "No more silence," and "Power doesn't equal immunity." Inside, the energy crackled like static. The trial of Officer Bradley Huxley was about to begin, and the nation was watching. Camille's family arrived in silence. Her mother, Miriam Monroe, wore a navy dress and a pearl necklace Camille had given her the year she graduated from Quantico. Her brother Jason, a high school principal from Oakland, walked beside her, jaw-clenched eyes, red but dry. Behind them came a delegation from the FBI, including Isaiah Langford, standing tall and stern in a black suit. His grief was invisible on his face, but it lived in his every step. The courtroom itself felt like a theater wood paneled walls, a raised bench, and the dull glint of cameras in the back, restricted to sketch artists and brief media coverage but still heavy in presence. Judge Lorraine Castillo, a seasoned federal judge known for her no-nonsense demeanor, entered with solemn poise. She understood that this case was not only about Camille Monroe. It was about every silent injustice hidden beneath uniforms, protocols, and institutional comfort. The prosecution opened with Assistant U.S. Attorney Brian Talbot, a soft-spoken but sharp-witted man with a gift for empathy and precision. He spoke plainly, but powerfully. "This case is not about all police officers," Talbot said. "This is about one officer, one act, one moment of fatal prejudice that took the life of an innocent federal agent." Camille Monroe was not just a victim. She was someone sworn to serve the same justice system that failed to protect her. The courtroom hung on his every word. Huxley sat at the defense table, looking strangely smaller than he had ever appeared before. His eyes rarely left the table, but when they did, they darted not with guilt, but with a cornered kind of fear. His defense attorney, Michael Spade, was a high-profile legal heavyweight known for defending police officers and political figures accused of misconduct. Spade's opening statement leaned into familiar ground: high-pressure, split-second decisions, the uncertainty of the job. But the difference this time was that everything had been recorded. The first days were filled with evidence: body cam footage, Camille's phone recording, enhanced surveillance video, forensics, autopsy findings. Nothing could be misinterpreted. Camille had followed instructions. She had clearly stated her actions. She had warned she was reaching for her phone. She was seated, calm and unarmed. Her death was not a reaction to danger. It was a trigger pulled out of fear, prejudice, or both. Then came the witnesses. Sergeant Elisa Grant's testimony shook the room. Her voice quivered, but her message was solid. There was a culture of fear in our department, not fear of crime, but fear of accountability. We protected each other even when we shouldn't have. Maria Alvarez, the housekeeper, who had witnessed the shooting from across the park, gave her testimony next. Her voice thick with emotion and a trembling accent cut through the courtroom. She didn't do anything. She was calm. She was respectful. That officer yelled and then shot. I will never forget the sound. Defense attorney Spade worked hard to sow doubt. He painted Maria as unreliable. He tried to portray Sergeant Grant as a disgruntled employee, but the weight of evidence, the clarity of footage, and the consistency of witness statements pushed back against every attempt to cloud the facts. Then Isaiah Langford took the stand. There was a sharp intake of breath as he raised his right hand to be sworn in. He spoke slowly, deliberately, every word carved from deep personal pain and professional obligation. Camille was the embodiment of service. She was brilliant, measured, principled. I trained her. I mentored her. I knew the caliber of her mind and her heart. What happened to her was not a tragic misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act rooted in power unchecked and a bias left to fester. He paused, looked around the room, then added, if an FBI agent in a tailored suit with her badge inches away can be gunned down while calmly asserting her rights, what does that say to every black woman in America just trying to get home? By the time the prosecution rested, the room felt heavy with truth. The defense called character witnesses, fellow officers who described Huxley as hardworking and misunderstood. A psychologist argued that Huxley suffered from high-functioning PTSD and may have acted out of irrational fear. But every angle was met with evidence. The jury could see Huxley's text messages, could hear the contempt in his voice, could measure the speed at which he went from irritated to armed. Closing arguments came swiftly. Brian Talbot stood before the jury, voice steady. No badge, no uniform, no pressure, excuses this. We entrust officers with immense responsibility, and when that trust is violated, there must be consequences not just for the victim, but for the future. The jury deliberated for 3 tense days. The nation waited. People camped outside the courthouse. Hashtags like Justice for Camille and Haas Accountability now dominated every social platform. And then the verdict came. The courtroom was silent as Judge Castillo read the charge's second-degree murder civil rights violation, resulting in death unlawful use of a firearm and obstruction of justice. The jury foreperson, a black woman in her 50s, stood and announced the verdict. Guilty, 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 guilty. A gasp, then silence. Then from the back of the room, a quiet sob from Camille's mother. Justice had spoken not in whispers or compromises, but in bold, unequivocal truth. Bradley Huxley stared forward, pale and frozen, as the judge ordered him taken into custody immediately. No bail. No delay. His attorney's motion for leniency was denied without hesitation. The courtroom emptied slowly. Outside, the crowd erupted not in celebration, but in release. Grief, rage, vindication all rolled into one moment of collective reckoning. Camille Monroe would not come back. But justice, long dormant, had finally opened its eyes, and it had seen her. The sun rose softly over Los Angeles, the morning after the verdict, casting golden light over a city still echoing from the weight of justice finally delivered. For many, the courtroom victory felt like the end of a long, painful chapter. But for others, especially those who had known and loved Camille Monroe, it was the beginning of something far more enduring. In the weeks that followed, Officer Huxley's sentencing tributes to Camille's life poured in from every corner of the country. The FBI held a private memorial at their West Coast headquarters, where Director Marie Delaney stood before a sea of agents and dignitaries, her voice resolute. Camille Monroe did more than wear the badge, she said. She honored it. She challenged it. She transformed it. On that day, the agency announced the creation of the Camille Monroe Leadership Fellowship, a program designed to support young people of color who aspired to careers in federal law enforcement and public service. The initiative promised not only scholarships and mentorships, but also a curriculum rooted in ethics, civil rights, and accountability. Camille's name would not be remembered only as a tragedy, but as a catalyst. Her former supervisor, Isaiah Langford, was appointed as the director of the program. He stood before the first group of fellows, young and determined just as Camille had been. Justice doesn't stop at the courtroom, he told them. Justice is what you do with the power you're given. That's what Camille believed. That's what you must carry forward. Outside of law enforcement, Camille's story had awakened a larger movement. Civil rights groups collaborated with community organizers, artists, and educators to create the Monroe Coalition for Policing Reform, a national campaign focused on de-escalation training, civilian oversight boards, and mandatory psychological evaluations for officers. What made the campaign unique wasn't just its ambition, but its tone. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about rebuilding trust, one policy at a time. In schools across California, Camille's story was incorporated into civics lessons. High school students read about her life, not just how it ended, but how she lived. The daughter of a postal worker and a school teacher. The girl who read 3 books a week. The law student who graduated top of her class. The agent who volunteered at a women's shelter every Friday night without fanfare or recognition. In her old neighborhood in Oakland, the park where Camille used to run every morning was renamed Monroe Community Green. Children now played where she once found clarity. A bronze statue was commissioned not of Camille in her FBI blazer, or with a weapon at her side, but in simple workout clothes, jogging forward with focus and strength. Beneath the statue were engraved the words she had once said to a mentee, "Never mistake silence for peace. Speak up even if your voice shakes." Her mother, Miriam, established the Camille Monroe Foundation with support from donors across the nation. Its mission to provide legal aid to victims of police abuse and to fund community-based programs that promoted racial healing. On the foundation's opening night, Miriam took the podium, her voice carrying the pain of a mother's loss, but also the pride of knowing her daughter had changed the world. Camille never wanted to be a symbol, she said, looking out at a crowd of over 1,000. She just wanted to make a difference. But now, she's both. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is never forgotten. The media eventually turned their attention to other headlines. The crowds outside courthouses thinned. Hashtags faded. But in quiet places in classrooms, in board meetings, in family dinner conversations, Camille's name lingered. Not because she had died unjustly, but because she had lived so purposefully. And in the halls of justice from Los Angeles to Washington, there were whispers, subtle, insistent of change. Not enough, not yet. But movement. A reckoning that had been too long in coming. Camille Monroe did not live to see the world she fought for. But because of her, more people are willing to fight for it now. And that is a legacy no bullet can erase. Camille Monroe's story is one of courage, tragedy, and ultimately transformation. A dedicated FBI agent Camille lived a life rooted in justice, discipline, and service. On what should have been a routine drive through Beverly Hills, her identity was reduced to the color of her skin, her success questioned, and her humanity disregarded. Officer Darren Huxley, driven by prejudice and personal failure, abused the power entrusted to him not just by unjustly stopping her, but by making a decision that would end her life and ignite a nationwide outcry. Yet Camille was not just a victim, she was a woman of purpose. Her death shocked the conscience of a nation, revealing how racism, when left unchecked, can fester even behind the badge of law enforcement. But in her death, she became a catalyst for change, sparking reforms, inspiring movements, and building bridges between communities and institutions long divided by mistrust. Her life's mission of service did not end on that street corner. It expanded beyond it, transforming systems, minds, and futures. From the courtroom, where justice was finally delivered, to the foundation and fellowship. Bearing her name, Camille's legacy lives on, not just in marble statues or legal reforms, but in every young voice now empowered to speak up, every officer trained to de-escalate rather than dominate, every citizen who demands accountability from those sworn to protect. The lesson from Camille's story is stark and deeply personal. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Her life challenges each of us to ask, what do we do when we witness bias? Do we stay quiet because it's easier? Or do we take the harder path, speak out, and stand for what's right? In today's world, we all have opportunities, big and small, to be the voice that disrupts prejudice, the hand that lifts someone up, or the leader who redefines what power looks like. Whether it's in our workplace, our neighborhood, or even at home, we can choose dignity over indifference and action over apathy. Camille didn't live to see the change she helped create, but we are here now, living in its echo. And it's up to us to carry it forward. If her story moved you, inspired you, or challenged you to see the world differently, don't let it end with this video. Subscribe to the channel to support the creation of more powerful, real-life stories that matter. Help us continue honoring voices like Camille's voices that remind us why truth, justice, and equality must never be optional. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling the stories that need to be told.